guys during their time on campus, and specifically these last few weeks?
Yeah, Keziah, obviously very talented, been excited about him, really since we signed him, and thought he was going to be more of in a backup rotational role this year, and felt like he was going to really grow as the season went on. Obviously, he's been forced into a different scenario now, and I thought he's playing pretty well. So did the defensive coaches. So I think as he continues to gain more experience and more confidence, he's a twitchy guy, that's got the size that really you want at that position. It's hard to find, and we've been really pleased with him. And Devon, obviously a year older, has obviously been in the program a little bit longer, has got a little bit better understanding of how and why we do things. But another really talented guy, both out of Maryland, McDonough High School and DeMatha. I think both of them have a bright future. Obviously, the scenario has changed from the beginning of the year to now, what their role and our expectations are going to be.
James, you talked a little bit about your Maryland roots yesterday. What kind of role do those roots play in your success recruiting the state, and why is that an important state for you guys to draw talent from?
Yeah, for us, obviously the region is really important, and whether you're hiring coaches that have connections in a region, whether it may be New Jersey or whether it's Maryland or Virginia like Dex, those things are important because relationships, right? So a bunch of high school coaches that I've known for a long time. AK is a perfect example. I've known his high school coach for 20 years. Deej has known his high school coach for 20 years. And there's trust there. And I think it's like anything else, right? You send your kid there and he's treated well and fairly and gets a great education and gets better at football, then it's a win-win for everybody. So obviously spending 8 years in that state, and when I was in that state, I recruited good portions of the state, so I got good familiarity. And that goes a long ways. And then even kind of when I was at other places, we still kept kind of going back there and recruiting. So a lot of good friendships, a lot of good relationships, and those things are important on the recruit trip.
Sticking with the Maryland theme, Curtis Jacobs, can you talk about how he's progressed? Because it looks from the outside looking like he's getting better and better. And do you see his role expanding at all as his career goes along, maybe shifting into other positions?
Yeah, I think he's been on a very similar path that a lot of our guys have gone through, where they start out to the field maybe as a freshman as a backup and you're kind of rotating in, then take that as a starting job, then depending on your body, how your body transforms, possibly moving in to the will linebacker or moving into the Mike linebacker, depending on your control of the defense and understanding of the scheme. So I think he's got the flexibility to do that. I think in a perfect world, that's what you'd like to recruit, kind of 3 field backers that grow into guys that can play into the box from an experience and from a confidence standpoint. With the way that people are running offenses right now, with the spread scheme and all the speed on the field, a lot of people are only playing with 2 linebackers. We're one of the few programs that are playing with 3 linebackers on the field.
James, also going off of the Maryland theme, I know with Debbie L mentioned that keeping you and Mike around at Maryland as well. You guys both, brought a lot to the program, she said. And, what are some of the thoughts of, just your time at Maryland with Mike and, just building that pipeline down there too?
Well, you think about it too, Mike Gundy was on that staff too. A lot of guys came out of that staff. I was fortunate to be there, learned a ton from Debbie Yao as the athletic director at the time. She's been like a mentor to me kind of throughout my career, somebody I call when I have questions. Obviously Ralph Regan, learned a ton from my time with him and the success. We had a bunch of success there. I think the time that I spent there on and off for 8 years as a receiver coach was kind of my first big time job. And then, then as the recruiting coordinator, and then coming back as the offensive coordinator, that a lot of time there. My one daughter was born there. Still have a lot of friends and relationships. I said this the other day. My wife worked on campus in the admissions office. That was a big growth time, in my career. both personally and professionally. So very appreciative of the time that we had there. Went to a BCS Orange Bowl. Did a bunch of cool stuff.
Any memorable Mike Gundy stories you can share with us? Any good ones?
Yeah, but probably not. Probably not for this setting. I used to go jogging with Mike. At like lunchtime, and Mike used to tell me he's going to be the next head coach at Oklahoma State, and before you know it, he was, and has been there for a long time and been very successful. And then obviously, Yursic's connection there as well. Mike's done a really good job as an interesting guy. He's got a great background and has done a really nice job at Oklahoma State. So I love to see him every year when I go to the convention.
James, why do you preach 1-0 every week? And why do you think it's important to instill that message in your team?
Well, obviously, for consistency, it's something that's been good to us, over my career, all the way back to Vanderbilt and now at Penn State. And that's the challenge, right? Is getting young people or people in general to be as consistent as you possibly can. You're constantly hearing voices and noise from the outside about this game is bigger than this game, and I think that's where you have to be careful. You get on an emotional roller coaster. So we try to keep it as consistent as we can. It's always about us, and then try to make sure that we do everything we possibly can through our week of our process of getting ready in terms of how we game plan and how we practice from an installation standpoint, so that we're peaking at the right time, both physically and emotionally. But that's the challenge. It's no different on the football field. Everybody out here can play. Some guys can make the play 1 out of 5 times. The other guys can make it 3 out of 5 times, and hopefully your best players can do it 4 out of 5 times. So, that's what you're trying to do, is just trying to create as much consistency throughout your program as you possibly can.
You've talked about the screen game being part of your run game. Does the number of decisions that Sean has to make in those situations factor into that as well? He's making 56 individual decisions during a game, or are those throws not as much of a workload?
Yeah, I would say those aren't major workload. I mean, it's pretty much numbers. Like if we got 3 guys out there and they got 2, throw it. Like my psychology degree from East Stroudsburg, I can do that one. So I don't think that one, those are overly challenging. Obviously, there's a bunch of other stuff on his plate as well that he has to manage specifically from a protection standpoint. And then obviously recognizing coverage, whether it's 2 high, 1 high, whether it's man or zone, whatever it may be. But that's also where the motions help. There are some people that are motioning and then playing zone coverage. But that's a huge man zone indicator for you. But yeah, it's challenging. But I do think the perimeter screens are important. An important part of our offense, whether it's bubbles or whether it's smoke screens or whatever it may be.
I got to spend a week with a men's hockey program and a week with a basketball program, and there is just an astronomical amount of stuff that goes on with the program that never sees the light of day in terms of the narratives that shape a season and the things that go on that you have to deal with relationships and everything. It just never gets out there. You are the arbiter of truth for your program, ostensibly. How do you decide what 10% goes through that microphone versus the 90% that stays inside the building?
I think that's the challenge, and it's the challenge for me because I'm a person that wants to be as transparent as possible, but then you're constantly thinking about, if I say this and it comes off the wrong way, is that going to upset a kid in the locker room? Sometimes you guys will ask me a question about how a player played, and I want to answer your question, but I also want to be respectful of the kid, his parents, and those types of things. It may be about, it may be other tough questions that you guys are asking me, and I want to make sure that I'm saying it in a way that's going to represent the university and the administration the right way, how they want information presented. So I think that's the hard part when you're in this position, is you want to be as truthful and transparent as you possibly can, but you also want to be respectful of all these groups that you work with and for. And I think that's the challenge, right? It's funny because people say, well, you become the head football coach at Penn State, you're the boss. Well, you're not really the boss, you just work for different people now, right? So I think that's the challenge. And you guys do a great job, and you're smart, and you ask tough questions, but constantly trying to balance all those things in my mind. So.
James, the initial college football playoff rankings came out, and my question to you would be, do you think that current system in place is fair for every team in the country? And if not, what would you offer up a suggestion to make it better?
No, it's not fair. Life is not fair. But I've brought up some things in the past that I believe in. A lot of the people have been here for a while. I've heard this multiple times. But I think the first thing you have to do, if you're not going to have a true playoff system, the first thing you have to do is make sure everybody is playing under the same model. How can you have some conferences that play FCS opponents and other conferences that don't? How can you have some conferences that are playing 9 conference games and others playing 8? It's very, very challenging in terms of if you get a bunch of people in the room, and we all have biases, right? Try to get a bunch of people in the room and they're trying to decide who are the best players. Some of it is data, but some of it is just your personal preference, right? How can you do that when not everybody's playing the same number of games or in a similar situation? So I think that's the first thing needs to do. Everybody needs to play 8 games. Everybody needs to play 9 games, conference games, or everybody needs to play 10 games. So whatever it is, just make it consistent across the board. I think that's one of the first things you have to do. And then the same thing, standardize. We're either all playing a 1AA or FCS opponent or no one is. But it just needs to be consistent. I think that's the first thing you need to do to allow people to sit in a room and decide who are the best football teams in college football. If not, there's always going to be a complaint. But I also say, right, like in basketball, I mean, what are we at, 64 teams in a tournament? And still at that point, who complains? 65, 66, 67. So there's always going to be complaints. But I do think that has to happen for it to even make any sense for people.
James, what do you do when your identity for what you want to be in a season doesn't work out, either through injury or guys that are working at it to make that work? What do you do in those moments when you want to be one thing and you can't be? So how do you navigate that?
Well, I think that's always the case, right? I don't think in any situation you have this vision of what you want to be before the year starts in any walk of life, let alone football. And it turns out exactly as that picture, as you thought it would be. You have to adjust, and you have to navigate, and you have to be flexible. And whether that is scheme or whether that is personnel, at the end of the day, no one cares. You just got to find a way to get it done, and you got to adjust, and you have to plan for some of these things. So that's the challenge. There's a bunch of moving parts. But I think that's where it starts. Is you can't sit here and say, okay, I got this vision, and it better fit this vision exactly how I saw it, and if not, it's not going to work. You constantly have to be adjusting and making changes and being flexible and willing to change.
Thank you, Coach.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
You too. See you soon.